This is Act 3, Friday, Scene 4 for the Afro-Diasporic Opera Forum. And we're talking about, this is a session where we're looking at the future of Black opera. In my opening comments on Tuesday to this wonderful forum where I had no idea how things would go. I mean, I thought it would be pretty good because we have some amazing people and really wonderful works. But I was expecting this to be exciting, and I tried something new. I spent a few minutes talking about something personal in those opening comments about my first encounter with the pioneering work of Professor Derrell Acon, the late constitutional law professor who was the first Black law professor at Harvard's law school, and it was the first one they had ever hired. He was hired in 1971. My first years of graduate school in musicology at Harvard, which began in the fall of 1989, happened to coincide with Professor Bell's last years there, as he took an unpaid leave of absence in protest that was meant to urge Harvard, and the law school particularly, to tenure a Black female law professor. Finally, they did tenure a Black woman, Lonnie Guinier, but that was in 1998, about 8 years after Professor Bell accepted the position or had left Harvard and then joined a position at New York University's law school. However, I talked about having the great fortune to hear Professor Bell read from his recent book at that point, And We Are Not Saved, The Elusive Quest for Racial Justice from 1987. And in that book that he was reading as students were protesting and there was a movement to tenure a Black woman at the Harvard Law School, he used a series of chronicles, fictional stories, to talk about segregated schools, affirmative action, the Equal Protection Clause, reparations, all these things that were in real life, but he sort of used them with this wonderful person, Geneva Crenshaw, and sort of in these different made up places. I didn't realize it then, but this was an anticipation, an early example of a movement that was going to grow and have significance and importance today, and that is Afrofuturism. I'm wondering if Black opera, this capacious construction that is the title of my recent book from 2018, if it opens up a space that feels adjacent to elements of Afrofuturism. It is a claiming of a space, this operatic space, and that has widely been considered all white and elitist. And it opens this space up to stories about Black experiences told by Black artists, composers, librettists, singers, dancers, directors, board members, as well, everyone telling these stories and to an audience. So I wanted to sort of make that little jump around to this idea of, is opera doing something? In the 19th century, I like to say that opera was doing the cultural business of what movies did for a lot of the 20th century, from like the 40s, 30s, 40s, through most of the century. How certain elements that were happening during, that were current and relevant got worked out on the silver screen. Now, of course, we know that these were happy stories or Hollywood endings or different things like that, but it was taking current issues and sort of putting them into the popular culture. Now, I think that's very much what opera was doing, at least in Central Europe and Italy and Paris, and then moving into Germany and what's the area around Slovakia and the Czech Republic and the Eastern Europe. But I'm wondering, is opera today, especially around Black issues, taking on this issue of sort of an Afrofuturism? I haven't quite found Wakanda yet on the opera stage, though maybe there will be a Black Panther movie. But is there sort of this imagined space that's important? I'm going to just close now with, before I introduce our panelists, with just a quick comment about this title, Black Opera. It's I didn't want to call the book that. being honest. I've told some people individually, but I thought, oh no, if we call it Black opera, then what's white opera? Then what's, does opera, that just felt really complicated. So I thought, how about calling it experiencing Black experiences on the opera stage, colon, of course, the academic colon, studies in the US and South Africa. I thought, that's a really good, honest title. And I'm not making something crazy up where what is Black opera? And my publisher and editor, Lori Matheson at the University of Illinois Press, I had worked with her with Blackness in Opera, the collection. And she's like, nope, marketing wants Black opera. So I was like, okay. I had some time to do a little defensive driving in the opening pages to say, this is not meaning that there's a Black opera and a white opera. I mean, unless anybody wants to say that, but I wasn't saying that. And it seems that this title, it's opened up a space and I'm really honored for it. People have used it. And so I realized the value of it. Just a quick comment, since I do realize that it is a complicated title, there's this Black Opera Research Forum, BORN, and you can look them up, blackoperaresearchforum.net. And we're going to have a whole forum, well, just for one day, don't worry, not this long, that's going to be talking about this capacious title and sort of what does it mean, charting the idea of Black opera. Can you have white composers or white people, librettists, people involved with the compositional team, who gets to perform it, really opening up some of these thorny questions. And just a quick shout out to Allison Lewis, who was at the previous session. She and another person, Nicholas, oh dear, I'm blanking on his name, but he had, they together put together this wonderful, oh, and I see the chat, there we go, just in case. Newton, thank you, Allison, in the chat. So Allison Lewis and Nick Newton put together on their own, in their own time, this sort of big group about of operas called the Black Opera Database. And we're going to be talking about that. This is on the Born website, and they came up with a few, over 180 pages worth. So we're not talking only the ones you've heard. There are a lot, and it keeps growing. It's a living list. So we'll be talking about this more, but I wanted to say, when we're talking about the future, or I like to think maybe the futures, plural, of Black opera, I just wanted to query some of these terms and sort of what they mean. Okay. Rather than going through everyone's bio, because all these folks have been on the program before, and there's a wonderful bio of each of them on the website, let me just say a few things about each of them and the order they're going to sort of open up. We're going to have a conversation. So with Dr. Derrell Acon, he wears a few hats as a scholar, administrator, and singer. And in the session right before this, he did a masterful job of bringing all three of these personae together as he was talking about his work in equity, diversity, and inclusion through this multi-voiced engagement of the poetry of Amiri Baraka, Langston Hughes, the writings of W.B. Du Bois, and recent activist directions, a type of Blacktivism that he'll probably go into more, that acknowledges that the opera house can be a space for liberating also, but certainly celebrating Black lives and non-white vantage points. Derrell will be the first one. And maybe, since I see we've got this wonderful double screen, I'll introduce each person as they come on. So Derrell, take it away.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. André. I hope most of the folks in the room had an opportunity to see the previous session, Poems Are Bullshit, Demanding Black Space in Opera. And in this session, I want to layer into that discussion my role on the Leadership Council of the Black Opera Alliance. But that's really about all I'll say here. I'm excited to move directly into conversation with my lovely colleagues, and I'm sure the conversation will be robust.
Oh, terrific. Okay. Thank you, Derrell. I do look forward to hearing more about the Black Opera Alliance in this context. And there probably are people who have signed in who might be active with the Black Opera Alliance. And we can say a little more about what that is. Melanie, you have several hats also to keep this hat metaphor going. And you're in the opera industry as a producer, a director, a stage manager, and I'm going to add technology guru. I have been on the receiving wonderful end with Boston Lyric Opera and other places. Opera Omaha has been a shining model of an opera house that is supporting new directions through collaboration. This pandemic has brought on new needs for artists, the arts, audiences, everyone who's been kept out of the physical opera house, and we're just beginning to see that change. Melanie, your career before and during the pandemic really seems to show the flexibility one needs in this business, and especially around opera. Feel free to just jump in with any of those points, ideas.
Thank you, Dr. Andre. It's so wonderful to be on this panel with all of you. And thank you once again to Ross and Bridget and International Contemporary Ensemble for having this forum. When Ross first brought this to me as in its early planning stages, he had mentioned wanting to get rid of the myth of scarcity of Black opera and the Black opera space. And I was so excited to jump in and help make that happen in any way possible through Opera Omaha. And that is something that I'm so invigorated by as we end here, the end of the third day, is truly the myth of the scarcity that there is of personnel, of the scholars, of the artists, of the works, of the creator, everything. There's so much and it's so abundant. And I'm really looking forward to how the industry can help take all of this information and move forward, right? As Dr. Andre mentioned, one of the things that I've learned in this pandemic time is adaptability and figuring out how to kind of pivot some of my skills and learn new skills. And with that, I was able to find Opera Omaha. They recognized that as a company run by white men, they wanted to authentically engage in creating more space for underrepresented voices. And so they approached me and my fabulous and wonderful co-curator, Shabrell Williams, to curate a series that we ended up titling Amplifying the Black Experience. And through that, this year, we've been able to engage with the Omaha community, really get into who makes up that community, the authentic storytelling that can take place, and not just the stories that we have that are based in trauma, but how we can also celebrate joy and joy as a form of resistance. And through that, it's been a really fantastic experience getting to know more of that community, getting to know Shabrell even more, but also figuring out how we navigate this virtual landscape as well. And something that I'm also looking forward to discovering as we move forward is with this repertoire, with all these creators, is not only how do we start seeing the canon change, but also how do we start seeing the way in which we perform and the way in which we make this work accessible, and what does the future of technology look like, and how can we help make that space more possible. And I'm very excited that tonight we get to watch Lee's work, which fuses so much of that, and it's a really exciting endeavor to see where the future of opera can head.
Oh my goodness, thank you, thank you. And one thing I should probably say, thank you, Melanie Bacaling. I've been working on her last name, but please feel free to just call me Naomi. I'm fine in this forum, we are all together. I am happy to sort of introduce our third panelist, and that is Lisa E., also known as Lee Harris. Gosh, yes, that's right. I got the right. And I'm going to keep this hats metaphor going because I know that her work fits in with this. She's a singer, composer, filmmaker, writer. It continues. I would love to give her the opportunity, so please feel free to talk both about these different roles you have in opera and how they've been evolving, but especially we're so excited about this new opera film, Cry the Third Eye, from 2020. I mean, it's like just a minute ago. And we're so excited to hear about it because we're going to have the pleasure of seeing it, of watching it in our final sort of get together of the conference at 7 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. So Lee, please jump in.
Thank you so much, Naomi, and the fellow panelists. I am so happy to be on this call. I mean, what a wonderful topic, the future of Black opera. when I hear the other speakers, and I hear your ideas, I'm really, really inspired. And I keep resonating around the fact that, for me, the future of Black opera, um, lies in the future of Black opera spaces. And I really question, how to have this conversation of the future of Black operas without talking about Black opera houses. It's really wonderful to work with, contemporary opera companies and production companies, and also to have experience with working with traditional opera companies, formally from Lincoln Center to Houston Grand Opera, where I'm here and I got my start in the operatic, um, field. But I recall my very first. So I'm thinking about the future of Black opera, and I'm thinking about Black spaces. I'm also thinking about Black roles, um, Black narrative, Black stories. And I'm remembering the very first opera that I was in where I was cast as a Black person. And I was 9 years old in a world premiere, called The Passion of Jonathan Wade, written by American composer Carlisle Floyd, commissioned by Houston Grand Opera. And I was cast as a Black person, um, as a Black slave, and as a 9 year old in America in 1990. That, was a real pivotal moment for me to understanding what, it is to identify as Black on the opera stage at such an early age, and for your, the character to identify as Black. Other than that, I hadn't seen many other. At that point, I was only 9, but I hadn't seen many other Black roles, Black characters being portrayed, by Black people, that were not slaves. So, that inspired me really, really early on as a young person to create my own kind of future for Black opera for myself, to perform. And I wanted to, uh, be the lead in my stories. I wanted to, just be myself. And I happen to be Black also, which is great. So I'm thinking about the Black opera spaces, and the National Negro Opera House in Pittsburgh. The house itself is still standing. I'm reading recently that it got some funding to be revamped and refurbished after a very long time. And it was built in 1908, and the company was founded in 1941. So that's really inspirational to me in this conversation, that there was a place first and then the work came into the place. So I just think that's instrumental, in talking about the future of Black opera. I'm really excited about you all seeing my film, Cry of the Third Eye, where I brought the story and the narrative into a different medium, first of all, film, but also into a different stage. So leaving the institution, leaving the architecture of the halls, which, as much as I appreciate all of the conversations going in the direction and the liberation and the expansion of Black opera and work, it's still disproportionately presented because there's disproportionate amount of Black spaces and architectural structures that exist, especially for this work. So I brought my work to my neighborhood, and public spaces, and also to my home. I'm really interested in thinking about places that are naturally occurring, if you will, where Black people already, I don't know, dominate or are celebrated in those spaces. I curated a performance festival on the basketball court, and it was, highlighting improvisational performance across disciplines into sports as well, where Black people, can shine at being themselves and also exhibit a wide range of performance, expertise. And I can't see anybody else on the screen right now. It's just my face. So I'm wanting to interact with you all, but I only see myself. But
It's disconcerting. I think in the top right, there might be something that says view in your screen. I don't know, I'm using a Mac.
Yes,
And
yes.
so,
There we go.
yes,
That helps.
you're not alone. We're here,
Yes,
and
I'm
we're all
like
together.
speaking into a vacuum of Blackness. But I don't want to, take up too much space and really welcome the conversation. But, just to continue a little bit, further, that exploration and investigation of space for these works to occur has really been central to my work and my practice as an interdisciplinary artist, from the basketball court to primarily art spaces and galleries, which has, aligned me cosmically with the International Contemporary Ensemble on several occasions, because they also operate in a lot of contemporary art spaces. That I found that space in particular was really more ready or more receptive for an idea of new narrative centering Blackness. So when I began writing an opera called Lilith in 2008, and the first organizations to help me develop that were Project Row Houses in Houston and also Art League Houston, and they're both venues for contemporary art. At the same time, I was already singing with Houston Grand Opera. I was already going to all of the company meetings and suggesting that the future of opera, a different conversation then than what we're having today, but that the future of opera had to seriously start looking at interdisciplinary media, specifically digital media. And I remember at a company meeting in 2009, presenting the idea that we should work more with projections and digital media. This is going to be very important. But at that time, I was kind of disregarded as a singer. So Naomi, I like to bring that back around, what you were talking about, wearing different hats and your voice being heard in different ways, or not being heard in different ways. So as a singer in a company meeting with an idea about production, also in a Black body, it was just like, what are you talking about? You're not on the creative team.
Wow.
And I was like, okay, that's cool.
In your lane.
It's cool. But I think it's also really fantastic that even though we are in this pandemic, and on the brighter side of the pandemic, to see the pressure and the pressurizing of the art forms adapting so that the art itself can exist. It's fighting against the humans so that it itself can exist, and catching up. We're catching up to it, and it's also catching up to us and our humanity. We're all here digitally now. So yeah, that's not a little bit of like I told you so, but a little bit of like I told you so. But
really, this prophetic element in Black voices.
Yeah.
And for you as a singer who should just sort of stay in your lane, do your thing, just sing your piece. And,
Right.
Also, I mean, in 2008, 2009, cell phones weren't as omnipresent as they are. I mean, nobody thought digital technology was going to go places.
Right.
And look, here we are. And here you've got an opera that's an opera film. Do you call it an opera film? What do you call it?
Yes, I actually call it a new opera film. And I'm really connected to that, attached to that being a new opera film. When it changes, it'll let me know. But in that it's new for me, and it's a new opera, and it's also a new film. And every part of this was an experiment for me, and clarifying my voice, and also making a public offering, a portrait of my neighborhood. So it started off as a project that was acting or proposed to be a bit of a tone poem, or really a photographic portrait of an area, of a place. And I was really interested in experimenting with how can I voicing my I like divert different ways of expression and expressing my soul and my thoughts without singing.
Okay,
And
sorry, I'm
that
just going to ask
yeah.
you froze a
Sure.
little bit on my screen.
Oh, sorry.
And it might, so I just want to make sure I understand that. So how can you bring pictures, or sorry, say that part again?
Yes. So it started off as a portrait of a place, and I
Okay.
was using photography to
And
do
this is
that.
the third ward in Houston,
In
Texas.
Houston, Texas. Yes, ma'am. It's a historically Black neighborhood, creative hub. It's a place. It's a home, and very special place for me. A place that I came back to from New York when I migrated back home. So it was like my returning place. And when I came home and saw this place again, after being gone for 10 years. It looked really, really different. It felt different. My grandparents, who I knew, who were like fixtures, and they were my architecture, they were my opera house literally in this place, were also aging. You know, they were old, they were dying is what it was. They were transitioning.
Sure,
And
sure.
they, yeah.
I hate to interrupt you, but there's just this incredible image where your grandparents were sort of the architecture, they were the space, they were your
Mm-hmm.
your opera house.
Mm-hmm.
Was this metaphorical? Did they love opera? Did they go to the opera with you? Can you say a little more?
Sure, absolutely. They were they sang. They were not professional singers, but they do sing. And in the third act of my opera, which you all will see tonight, hopefully, the beginning of the third act starts with them singing a hymn in their home in unison. They were spiritual people, a deacon and a deaconess, and counselors and spiritual counselors. And so they sang a lot as part of their practice. They would go to the opera to see me. And I'm their youngest granddaughter, and they would go to the opera to see me, and they would come to New York to see my recitals at Mannes and at Manhattan School of Music. And they followed my career, all my recitals, all the time. And in my family, it was like a joke that that I got my operatic voice from my grandmother, who they would always say, Granny sings opera, Granny sings opera. But vocal pedagogues would say, oh, she, really accesses a head voice. But then that goes, again, vocal pedagogues might say this one thing, and I myself would challenge my family in saying like, oh, Granny doesn't sing opera. But then I'm like, actually, who am I to say that Granny doesn't sing opera?
Of that, yeah. What can opera be? This is amazing. I interrupted you before. I don't know if you lost that train of thought, but please continue to tell us more about the Cry of the Third Eye.
So Cry of the Third Eye is it's a tribute in a way. It's a meditation focused on many themes, but three main themes: legacy, and legacy and place. And the house that I actually am calling you on from right now, where I'm at right now, is my grandparents' old house. I live in it now, and it is my set. So my grandmother is central at the beginning of Act 1, and she actually had just lost my grandfather. And so as I was making this portrait poem, I was also caregiving for my grandmother, and I thought, well, I know the healing power of art, and actually her grief as an expression of her love was so huge and palpable that it was the biggest expression of anything I'd ever witnessed or been near my entire life or career, that I had to just ask her, Granny, not to exploit your trauma or grief, but can you collaborate with me on this project? And she said yes. And so my grandmother starts in the opera, and I wrote a fictional story to go along with it, so that it just, was more accessible to other people that weren't related to her directly.
And but you are getting this story that we're getting right now from you.
Exactly. So I wrote a parallel counterpoint. That is the story of a young girl who lost her dog. And that was about as close in proximity of the feeling that I felt was universal that I was feeling from my grandmother. But still just like non-parallel. But so my grandmother is there, and 4 generations of her progeny are from between Act 1. So she's in it. My mother is also in it, and her siblings, and then I'm in it in the 3rd generation, and then also like my younger cousins or my grandmother's great grandchildren are also in the film. And that was really important to me. It took me 10 years to make. I started in 2010 and I finished in 2020. And every act I thought was going, after the first act, I kind of thought it was going to be alone. I thought it was finished. Soon after, I realized that it wasn't, and each act was revisited with 4-year interval in between. So I wanted to look at time in the same location. So to try to express also visually, which really the visual medium helps in so many ways to express how time and change are operating. And it's so musical. I mean, it's also central to our musical process.
I love how you were telling Houston Grand Opera in 2008, hey, we got to, do something with digital opera. And then 2 years later, you're like, I'm on it. Although you
Right. You know,
realized it.
absolutely. And I have to say to their credit, to the credit of one of my mentors who was there, who's very tough on me. He was very tough on me, but I also he was my first maestro. I don't like that word so much, but as a child. And then later, when I was in my 20s, I sang at Aspen Opera Music Festival. And he was also there as the director. His name is Richard Beto. Many of you in the opera world may have heard of Richard Beto. He's amazing, actually. And when I was an adult at the Houston Grand Opera Adult Chorus, when I came back to Houston, Dr. Beto did tell me, if this isn't really your thing, then you should do your thing. And I was like, I mean, this is my thing. And he's like, well, if it's not though, if it's not your thing, then you totally should do your thing. And there was something, I think, that unhinged in my subconscious in the form of permission, especially when it comes to academia and pedagogy, and this relationship with mentorship, and this relationship with expectation, and also the legacy of academia and study and studio, that I needed my mentor from my childhood to kind of give me the permission to experiment. That doesn't happen so much in the classical realm. So I just kind of took that word from him as a wink to just take a few seasons off and go and explore. And that's what I've been doing.
And it was amazing. It's wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I love the way this can be a conversation. And I'm wondering if Melanie or Derrell, if you want to jump in with any of these elements from Lee's story. It just feels like a Blackness in opera is sort of finding a space for someone that might be connected to the classical world, but we're always sort of adjacent to it seems too, that we're never fully seen as fully belonging, even when we do. So we're sort of creating this other belonging. Melanie, jump in.
Yeah, I first of all just want to echo the incredible foresight that you've had 10 plus years ago to be talking about mixed media in this art form in particular, because I feel like even today people are very resistant to it, or thinking that it's just a band-aid for bringing something to our audiences. But truly I think it is the future, and the fact that you so bravely just did it and took it on, and the fact that in 2020 it came out at a very particular time and a lot of other people just started doing it, and you're like, I already did that. So thank you is what I want to say for that. Thank you for being brave enough to follow that. And I totally feel that, and I know that this kind of harkens back to our conversation the other day about how so oftentimes in the classical music world, it's, well, you are a singer and that is your box, or you are a stage manager and that is your box, and you may not go outside of that box because it's very prescribed for what you may do. And I think that's truly a hindrance to being able to welcome other voices into this art form, because it's all putting everything in a box and not necessarily thinking of what else there could be and what else there is and who else we all are. And it's so limiting in this way that and again, in harkening back to our conversation of how much of a spiritual process it is to create, and how much more of ourselves we give in as artists to the different projects that we have, whether regardless of what role we have for that specific project, but we're bringing in all of our experiences. To hinder us by calling us one thing or saying we're only allowed to be one thing totally negates the actual art making and the authenticity of that. And I just think it's really beautiful that you've been able to harness that and move forward despite the fact that everyone else is telling you something different.
I appreciate that, Melanie. And I just want to jump in because I don't want to forget when you said about outside of a box and we're talking about, we hear that a lot, like, thinking outside of the box, being outside of the box, and that structural thing that is the box. Well, that is like really, I think, also central to the thought process of the future of Black opera, the vocal box. And for that reason, and the vocal practice and performance, I'm thinking about the future of Black opera and Black opera audiences, of Black listeners also, and tapping into Black frequencies. And so the thing is, when I first made Act One, I'm bringing this back to the box, because when I first made Act One, I perform all of the vocals, and usually this piece, how I'm talking to you all right now, I'm usually performing and narrating with like public discourse and communication with the audience there. So we're like watching the opera together, and I'm kind of sharing through, as a portal with them. But today you guys are just gonna watch it without me. It's like pre-portal. But in personifying the voice of a young girl who has lost her dog, I vocally performed as a young girl, as a young Black girl, who's is a very, very important voice that needs to be heard. And I remember being a young Black girl, the same age as my main character at the beginning when she started. Of course, she grew up, but that voice being put in my particular voice being put in a box of an opera house, of a top tier world international opera house with a huge budget. So that's there was already a kind of expectation and a weight and a projection on a small Black voice, to perform outside of itself. I wanted to give respect. I wanted to pay respect to a young voice and the sounds of a young voice, and I wanted young ears to be able to hear this. We have older adult mature ears. A lot of people here today are seasoned opera listeners and audience members who still will hear an American opera and say, I have no idea what they're saying. And it's kind of like a wash of sound and vibration and technique that comes over people, with sometimes you have to go back and restudy to hit the core of the intention or the transmission of the information that was in the score. I didn't have time for that in this particular work, or the budget, but honestly, the budget of time I didn't have, and I wanted to get rid of the middleman, which is translation. I wanted to get rid of that middle space and get directly to a conversational, you can hear me, and actually your words and speaking at this volume or singing with this vibrato or with this support and this tenor is just as epic and monumental in this world as anything that people with a lot of money can or cannot understand. It being unintelligible does not make it better.
Right. Fair enough. And I like this level of sort of translation on multiple levels, from the actual content of the text that's being sung with issues of super titles, to this idea of being legible and understandable and readable by different audiences.
Yes.
Which I love how part of, and I'm renaming this panel The Futures of Opera, the plural, because I think somehow having multiple things sit together works well, especially when there's so many avenues. So we've got this technological element, and what does it mean when it's a Black woman who's doing this, not just, oh my gosh, it's 2019, everything's gone under, let's try this right now. But this was part of your artistic journey and vision for over a decade now. And this is about all the things that are so important in terms of home and where there's a space. I think a big element of this conference and this forum that's come up is making space and the politicized nature of what that space is, because we haven't, on one hand, we have always been in spaces, whether it's in churches or in sororities or in people's homes, in all Black spaces. But to have this be sort of out there in the rest of the world, there's been so much resistance. We need to remember that opera, our beloved form, people on on this call, we love it, and yet it has been a segregated space. Marian Anderson's, 1955 debut at the Metropolitan Opera was sort of a big moment because it sort of began to end that segregated space. So it has been less than 100 years, and yet, I always like want to remind myself that this isn't a like, oh my gosh, why aren't Black folks going to the opera? Well, it hasn't always been so welcoming.
Right.
And that we still have parents and grandparents who remember it wasn't all that welcoming. Mm-hmm. I'm wondering if the sort of activism element in terms, because I've heard so much now about Black bodies and how with all the trauma stories, the trauma drama, whatever you want to call it, trauma porn, to actually be happy and healthy and surviving is an element of activism. It's saying, I am here and it is okay. I'm wondering, so our very presence is an activist stance. Derrell, in your last, right before this, in your last speech, I feel like you've given so many, but with what we heard just recently, there was this element of Blacktivism and this sort of the importance of space, Black spaces, and what could an authentic type of advocacy be. I know you've been really active with the Black Opera Alliance, and I just want you to jump in whenever you feel comfortable talking about that. But again, what are these different futures? Maybe they're not separate, but they're actually intersecting at some point. So the technological element and being creators and filmmakers and saying, this is my story, as well as I'm going to shine a light on other people's stories, from behind the scenes. I'm going to be on the board and make sure that people have money to do these stories. Like, I think there's lots of different avenues, angles, arenas for advocacy that are out there. Does this feel like a future of Black opera?
I think absolutely. Listening to Lee's thoughts, it leads me back to one of the central terms in my presentation that I use throughout my work, and this double consciousness, this idea, what a lot of scholars call a sixth sense and a unique perspective. And I think that's one of the big deficits at present in opera, is that we're not really allowing that to flourish. Here's someone over 10 years ago who sort of had an eye to what would really transform the art form. And we are only now, 10 years later, tapping into that. I think
we have to.
Exactly. Right. But this prophetic sensibility really is something that is prevalent throughout Black culture. I think about Black grandmothers and grandfathers, elders, and the role they play in our communities. And I think about, when I'm often facilitating all BIPOC spaces, the nuance of conversation that is allowed to come to the fore in those conversations versus these more widely public-facing discussions that tend to get stalled when we come up against certain terms in the EDI space and folks not understanding them, or us having to manage what Robin DiAngelo would call white fragility and this inability to truly accept one's position and the larger framework of how this all of these elements work together. And so I think absolutely part of our activism is just being and flourishing. I think that's what folks like, Jesse Norman and Leontine Price did so beautifully. But you speak about my work with the Black Opera Alliance, and I would layer in that I think today calls for even more activism, even more explicit, I am doing this because I am trying to create space, I am trying to create belonging. And part of that is through exclusively Black space and being able to heal from all of the trauma porn, as a lot of folks have gotten around to saying these recent days, but also in terms of synthesizing the various perspectives, because, Blackness is not monolithic, right? And synthesizing those perspectives and really really cultivating some sort of a strategy. And that's really what we're trying to do at Black Opera Alliance. So here is my plug for Black Opera Alliance. If you don't know about this organization, I implore you to learn more. I'm just going to show you our mission statement. This is our website, built beautifully by Sequoia Holmes. And the mission here, let's just go. So our mission is to empower Black classical artists and administrators by exposing systems of racial inequity and underrepresentation of the African diaspora in all facets of the industry, and challenging institutions to implement drastic reform. And so right now we're in the midst of releasing surveys, data collection workbooks, board surveys, administrative staff surveys, and really trying to create benchmarks of where we stand in terms of equity and inclusion, so we can all as a field move forward from in an authentic way. And it's unfortunate that artists and administrators with these various jobs must also take on the role of like active, courageous activists in the field. But you know, this work has not been done in any substantive way over the last decades, and so we must. And I invite, as I said in my last presentation, for everyone, especially white colleagues, to join in this fight. Figure out your brand of activism, your brand of advocacy, and join us for this in this fight for justice.
Thank you so much. I feel that one really important of the futures of Black opera is to have people saying the status quo is no longer working. Because you know, and this is what I think so many of us are concerned about, as things are opening up and people are getting vaccinated as it is available, we're all afraid that this is going to be that moment in history and now we go back to what it was. And it's like, no, we can't do that. So this advocacy, it's like you've already seen, we've had so many panels and Zoom things where people are talking. There are other voices, we need to hear them. I want to invite both the panelists as well as people in our larger audience to put questions in the chat, and we will answer them. You can also raise your hand. There's a little reactions button at the bottom of your screen, and that'll bring you, because we're all in different formats with gallery or speaker view, but that'll bring your little hand right to the front. And while people are thinking about that, and also panelists, please feel free to jump in with different futures. I have to give a plug for scholarship. One of the key things, and for any of you out there, I don't care how old you are, where you are in your educational journey, if you are a professor, if you're already teaching, if you're looking for something to do as a young person going to graduate school, there is so much history out there that needs to be written. There's a lot of goodwill out there, and I believe that there are people who will teach in their opera course. They'll adapt it to include operas by Black composers if they have access to them. They're doing surveys, they're doing other things, maybe their specialities in something else, but if they have the materials, the scores, the commentary, the libretti, recordings, if that's out there, a lot of people will say, oh great, I can do that. And that's where the superpowers of being a scholar, and Dr. Acon, I know you're smiling, but any of us can be scholars to get this stuff out there. So please think about that. Get this stuff, again, tell your friends. This is an area, and yes, scholarship moves sort of slowly and steadily, but I like to think of it like, and this might sound really strange, but a glacier in motion. Once it's going and you've got a project, it's happening. There's like everything is moving in a good way, not destructive glaciers. So I want to say that one of the futures I see very strongly in opera is getting actual materials out. This is a big part of what musicology is. How do we understand Gregorian chant? Well, we look up treatises and we publish them and we sort of learn how to perform them. How do we perform the operas of Harry Louis Freeman? Well, we go to Columbia, where there's a big archive that was donated in 2008, where there are over 20 operas there waiting. Voodoo was one opera that was performed in 2015. There are some of those arias are now circulating, but we need to just get out there. Gosh, I feel like I'm on some sort of show, you know, please give now. No, I mean, yeah, sure. Fine. Give money to the Black Opera Alliance and the International Contemporary Ensemble, but also get out there and find these incredibly beautiful, wonderful works. Contact George Lewis and say, I want to know more about Anthony Davis and his talk this morning. I'm going to be publishing more sooner on Anthony Davis. He's been on my docket, but it is time. He really needs to have stuff out there. So there's a wonderful opening. There's lots of opportunities. And that's how I want people to think about what scholarship is. We've got some things in the chat. Could panelists speak more about what is meant by Black only spaces? Oh, that's a super easy one, isn't it? I'm joking. Thank you for putting that in the chat. What is a Black only space? I think there are many of them. Derrell, you want to jump in?
Sure. One thing I would say is that, like, in the case of Black Opera Alliance, there is this sort of element of Black only space because there are conversations around, Blackness or the harm that Black folks experience in the art form and sort of unpacking that. But I do want to clarify that when I say Black space, often I'm not talking about a Black only space. I'm talking about space for Black people to breathe, space for Black people to create, space for Black people to feel free and like they belong, right? And it's really more of an equity statement as much of it, more than it is one of exclusion, right? I think there's definitely something to be gained by having conversations amongst only Black people, the same way there's probably something to be gained about having conversations amongst only women or only queer folks. You can move through topics more briskly. But as I said in my previous presentation, this demand for Black space, I think, should be a piece of advocacy for everyone, almost especially white folks, because what inequity tells us is that at present white folks have more agency in these white supremacist structures, and so use that agency toward justice, use that agency toward an art form, a future of our art form that is going to more authentically bring in voices of myriad experiences. We at right now are talking about the Black experience, but myriad experiences. The more we're able to dismantle those strictures, those barriers to all of these other experiences, other walks of life able to coming to the fore, the better off our art form is going to be. I speak as a Black activist, but I also speak as a scholar and lover of this art form and a believer in its power. And I just know from my research, from my, the ways in which I practice my advocacy and the work that I do, that we are not experiencing the full power of the art form. And we can, like, we have the minds, we have the Lisa E. Harrises, the Melanie Bacalings, like all of these folks who are able to think outside of what exists right now, which is full of so much marginalization, into a better future that is more inclusive, more authentically equitable.
Thank you so much for that. Yes.
Yes.
Please jump in.
Yes, I wanted to jump in. I'm reading the comments too. But I wanted to jump in and agree with Dr. Derrell, because it's there are places where the places where Black people can be, comfortable. But I do want to say that there is also, I think it's very important, this is my belief, I think it is very important that everyone here that is listening, Black or non-Black people, everybody knows the importance of Black only spaces. And I feel like just in that acceptance of knowing that, one, it's important, two, they exist, three, they don't have to be publicized to exist. And I'm looking at you, Black people. And four, that the idea that Black only spaces do not have to mirror or incite the fear that white only spaces have terrorized us with in their beingness. So this idea that a Black only space is a threat because we know what white only spaces are capable of, I feel like for a Black future, we need to get rid of that. That has nothing to do with Blackness or Black space. If you have a question about the idea of a Black only space, I ask that you just imagine it as a good thing and start there. And that's all I have to say about that. Oh, I do also want to say about one other future, Naomi, you were asking about more futures. And I spoke about my, Houston Grand Opera and these like institutional backgrounds. But when I made a pivotal career change, and became an artist, I started a I started a production company here in Houston, Studio Inertia, and I founded it with my good friend and long-term collaborator, interdisciplinary artist Alicia B. Wormsley. And Alicia B. Wormsley is a new media artist, and a lot of you might have seen her work in the form of billboards and text statement, "There are Black people in the future." And that has reverberated through the pandemic. And it was murmured from her mouth and created from her mouth since way before, and has now been able to be, shared with the general public as a need throughout the pandemic until now. And I just wanted to give a shout out to Alicia, who I saw in the comments, and that idea of posing truths as a place, truths and acceptance as a place for Black futures, as a place for, like Dr. Derrell says, all futures to exist at the same time. Many things can be true and existing at the same time. So yes, so shout out to Alicia, who we've been creating operas together for a very long time.
That's wonderful. I want to take just a moment as Melanie, did you want to jump in? Please, and I'll jump in after you.
I just wanted to say something very quick to Dr. Acon's comments, and especially to his speech earlier this afternoon. Just this idea of authentically engaging, and that idea of authenticity is something that I think is really crucial to actually propel us into these futures, because so many times I think, and in wanting to do right, it can often be actions that are more performative or more about checking off the boxes. And in order to authentically engage with Black spaces, with artists of color, with more people of abilities and different backgrounds, that it does need to come from a place of authenticity. And I think that really spans not only in who we're hiring and the works that we're performing, but also how we're engaging with our audiences, that it's not something of, white saviorism trying to be like, oh, hey, look at this art form that you've never experienced before, but in a way of actually authentically, truly engaging with the communities in which we're a part of. And then that can really engage the dialogue and actually bring more people in.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And I want to, what this says dovetails nicely to what I was going to talk about. As an academic, and I will put that hat on right now, the word authenticity is always around in scare quotes for me. And it's because, and I love academia in many ways, but sometimes it just makes things a little complicated. And authenticity begs the question, who is the arbiter of what is authentic? And who gets to say what is authentic? And then, and I'm simplifying a bunch of things, but then is authenticity a monolith of something? Whereas if I'm hearing you correctly, Melanie, you're not trying to say that. It seems almost like you're trying to say an unmediated voice, a voice that's not being like on the way far end of the spectrum, minstrelsy, where you have white people putting on the makeup and pretending to be Blackness. But then, so that's a very mediated version of what Blackness is. But then I don't want us to lose the word authentic, because in so many ways it's really helpful, but maybe sort of an authentic, unmediated, and to realize that there's no, I'm putting S's on everything, futures, authenticities, we'll have all different version. But and please feel free to clarify if I didn't get that, but this idea of what is a Black voice speaking for itself, realizing that there are multiple voices and there will be a lot of shared overlap experience, but it's not only one thing. Yeah, okay, you're not.
Yeah, I just wanted to, say that you sort of gave maybe the most explicit example of inauthentic performance in minstrelsy, but I just want to note that today we are experiencing insidious, inauthentic telling of Black stories. And the reason that's happening is because there is a scarcity. We talked about this, the scarcity myth earlier, in one context, but I'm going to bring in and say there is a scarcity of Black folks in leadership, of Black folks with producing authority, of Black folks with artistic say at the table. Like, I would be fine, I would sleep so peacefully if I never saw another production of Porgy and Bess produced by white people. I truly would. Because what happens is you are letting these structures that are already inherently supremacist, and I use that for those of you who may not have experienced EDI training, and in a very strict version of its definition, supremacist, in that there is a white hegemony that exists right now in our art form. There's no denying it. And so equity begs us to do everything we can, no matter how aggressive and intentional, to counterbalance that if we are authentically going to tell stories that are not centered in whiteness, right? And one really good example, Naomi, as we've talked about, and I'm sure a lot of folks are privy to, is the example of, they still want to kill us. This piece by Daniel Bernard Roumain, that was commissioned by a company that then determined that because another Black artist did not feel a truth about one of the lyrics, that the company sort of took the role of arbiter and just determined which of the two Black artists would be privileged. Like, that is not authentic storytelling within a Black space. That is whiteness intervening and telling us how far we are able to go before our stories become too provocative to be put on stages. And in that case, in that context, I would say go so far as to saying white stages. This is only palatable to the point that we can take it in without a certain level of provocation.
Absolutely. Can I jump in? Because yes, and yes, and yes, and yes, yes. Yes. And yes. And I, as a kind of a plug, I guess, also, is that Black production companies, like what Dr. Derrell is talking about, like that, beyond the production companies are built into the theater. They're like executing at the top, but Black production companies, so, and speaking of authenticities, there's I'm a teacher, I'm an educator as well, so I'll put that in your hat theme, Naomi. I'll put that hat on, and
you're wearing lots of hats.
Wearing lots of hats. And as an educator, one of the classes that I teach a lot is how to access your inner voice and your authentic voice. And I offer that class to everyone, but I also offer a special version of that class for singers, because I think at the location of the box, of the vocal box, breaking down the pedagogy, breaking down the disassociation of this part of the spiritual part of this physicality that we use. And singers have a lot to say. They have a lot to say, and singers have a lot to say. And in the actual nature of their athleticism and the training, their actual spirit is cultivated to speak more truth. But in the actual platform of the art form, they are guided, and you guys are saying arbitrated, I think that's the word you guys are saying, they are guided and shifted to use that musculature in one regard. So I have a how to access your authentic voice for singers, which is, and I teach this class. I teach it with the College of Performing Arts and other places, but it's super, super, super important, and for everyone, because once we understand that, like, one, the voice, or a lot of opera singers that are here, or people around opera singers will hear singers often talk about la mia voce, la voce, la mia voce, and it's really great and it's really cute. It's super cute. It's super cute to speak about the voice as a part, it's separate from you, but it is very much you, and that part of identifying and putting the voice back into the body and being able to safely, without fear of death, and I'm just going to get to the root of it, without fear of death, being actually able and safely to use your voice and your God-given voice to speak your truth, to channel and speak out, that is an authenticity that we need spaces to provide for. And I wanted to say also, I teach another class with Guerrilla Opera. They're based in Boston, and I teach a class on opera libretto writing. And this was really, really important for me to start this class and this collaboration with them, because in my class, we have composers, we have dancers, we have interdisciplinary artists, we have scholars, we have mathematicians, everyone who signed up and who paid and who also thinks that I want to write an opera, and additionally, they signed up for a more of a traditional idea of opera. And some of those students, some of my participants, bless their hearts for dealing with me, but some of them are getting I don't service a traditional way over another way. So I'm centering the artist and the author into your work, because I feel like that is part of the authentic process. As far as supporting authenticities, it also goes to supporting the authentic voice of the composer, the authentic voice of the author. And every person gets to show up in their work if they want to. We get to.
Yeah.
And that's, I just want to say that.
Oh, thank you for saying that. There's some things that have come up and the chat is just blowing up in wonderful, terrific ways. Thank you. I want to come back to this question. And first of all, thank you for Guerrilla Opera. I love anything, oh my gosh, and I haven't heard of it. And it's like, I want to know. So thank you, thank you. Also, I want to go back to this idea of different spaces. And one thing that might be helpful, or what's helped me understand this, because I can understand if somebody says, oh, this is an all male space and I'm not allowed. My first reaction is, oh, okay, that's a little scary. Maybe I don't want to go, but that's just how I've been conditioned. But I can understand there are so many non-Black people who are such wonderful allies and friends. They have Black relatives. They want to be on the inside. And so it's not, I love what you said, Lee, that think of a Black space as being sort of a positive thing, that some good things are going on in there. I also want to bring a theorist, Adrienne Rich, who is known in women's studies as a queer theorist. And she talks about this concept of compulsory heterosexuality. And so as a lesbian woman coming out, it was what made that so hard. And she was writing, I think in the 70s and the 80s, is that there wasn't another alternative. Like the norm was always that you had a man and a woman and there was a heterosexual relationship. Everybody was cisgendered. There was no gender dysphoria. And everything happened according to plan. And now we know, thank goodness, that there is no one plan for everybody always. Some people might have their own plans, but there's one size doesn't fit all. And so this compulsory whiteness, this idea that those are the safe people, who the police are, who are the government, who are the teachers, that they're the ones who have everybody's best interest, they're the smartest, they always know what's happening. When you never see yourself replicated, you've internalized that so much. And you need to find a way to realize, wait a minute, I have humanity and it's going to look different from the people all around me. And so part of the Black space is letting Black people, or part of a Japanese space, although there's Japan, but here in the United States with these different diasporic groups, having these only spaces is helping to deal with something that no single white person on the planet is meaning to hurt everyone. But because you happen to be born into that, nobody can control how, how they're born, their race, that there needs to be some space to help deal with that. I don't know if that helps, but I get, and I love this idea. Thank you, Kurt Howard. Caucuses are important. Building and caucuses, I like that, this idea of having these only spaces and then having coalitions when you're able to reach out. So it's not that there's a Black space that's going to burn up the world. No, I mean, we know that there are, well, I won't even go into it, but there are a lot of white folks who are trying to burn up the world, and they take their guns and they do stuff. we need spaces, you know, and I only say that not to say, oh, this is terrible, but look at the reality, look at things from a Black vantage point. That is the reality we're living in. So don't feel left out. Feel that your support of us when we need this is a very loving, helpful, wonderful thing to do. I hope that didn't confuse things. Lee.
Naomi, I wanted to say that this year, just a couple of months ago, I've been in this residency with the wonderful people at Ballroom Marfa, and they're an arts organization and venue in Marfa, Texas. And because of the pandemic, they shifted gears and started focusing on sound artists and made a sound artist residency. So I was one of the artists that were there for a while. And speaking of this realities, one of the focuses of my research there was creating a place called Afram, which is Marfa. It's also Marfa spelled backwards, but it's Afram, and it is a African America, and it is a Black inner space reality for Black dreaming and Black entities to exist in their Black bodies, and just a place. And having this, speaking of support for people that want ideas or direction as to how to be included, this institution was so supportive of me experimenting with the idea of a Black inner space reality that they acted as, I heard in my mind, Jesus be a fence, but they acted as like a security. They supported that. It was private. It was for me. That what do you need for that to exist? They believed in it. They like, that would be an amazing thing to exist in this world. So let us offer our support in believing in it. And so when you talk about these like realities, that is there. It doesn't have to be this idea of exclusion.
Right.
This idea of exclusion is really not of this earth. It's really not a human idea. So that if that's coming around your consciousness in the conversation or in the feeling or the action or the incentivizing to act, replace it. It's not of this earth. Replace it. Flip it maybe backwards and see what you find there on your inner space reality.
Oh, thank you, Lee. I'm noticing Sharon Strange has put in a wonderful reference to Bell Hooks's essay, Loving Blackness as Political Resistance from 1994. And I love getting these things out there. And Lee, you're talking about this space in Boston, Marfa, or yeah. Oh, good. Yes, definitely. Put it in the chat for all of us. That nobody is born knowing it all. And particularly in the US around race and ethnic issues. And we are a country where we have really, I don't think there's any other country that has this particular history with, you've got a Native American, several groups of people, then you've got white colonizers coming in from England, and then they're bringing this captive audience of slavery. And then you've got other people with this melting pot history. I mean, there is something very special and wonderful about the United States, but a complicated element. And we are having to deal with it. This legacy hasn't been dealt with before so well. Wow, lots of questions. There are wonderful things in the chat. I can't wait to look up this Marfa. Thank you, Lee, for putting this in. We still have a little time, and I know our panelists have been amazing. Thank you. Are there questions or people? I want to invite people to raise your hand or put something in the chat to say something.
Can I just make a comment really quickly to one of the comments that was made in the chat about there was, Arlene Dunn, safety and artistic expression is so important. And yes. And I think that that's part of what this work is creating safe spaces for all voices to feel like they can be vulnerable enough to create in a space. And I think that comes from this work. I also think it comes from within like the rehearsal room, since that's a lot of what my work is in this industry, is actually being in the rehearsal room, making that happen. It just putting a plug in here for advocating for artists and having more one of the things that I do is an artist intimacy advocate. It's a role that I created with Boston Lyric Opera that I'm hoping to also working with some other companies that I'm working with. But basically, how do we make sure that we are creating consent-based rehearsal rooms with consent-based practices, especially in an art form in which we are performing operas, you know, that are hundreds of years old and that have just moments of intimacy that we kind of brush over. And it's a lot of assumptions being made of people's backgrounds. But to speak to what Lee was saying, you know, as an artist, you are your whole person, bringing your whole experience to the work you're doing. We can't ignore that whole person and what experiences they might have in order to be creating in that space. So and this is me just saying that, yes, safety is so important in order for us to be creating, actually creating and being vulnerable enough to make more work in the future.
Melanie, thank you so much for this, because I've heard a little bit about that with film, and you know how there's sort of different coaches there.
Mm-hmm.
I think of different sort of acting coaches in opera. The first thing that comes to mind are like the sword people, you know, for how to have a realistic sword fight. Do you have anything you can put in the chat that sort of gives a little more experience of having this type of sensitivity and awareness, bringing it into the opera house? Because it sounds like this might be a sort of new thing and folks might want to learn more.
100%. It is very new. It is, and I'll definitely put two websites in the chat here. It is something that's obviously more in film and television, intimacy coordinators. It's become more of a commonplace in theater to have intimacy directors, and only in opera has it started becoming a little bit more of the norm. Minnesota Opera has an intimacy director as part of their staff, which is actually the first company to do that. But I think as much as we have standard in fight choreographers, as you said, I think that
Yes.
should be just a standard in the same way, all again in the notion of safety. But it is very, very new to opera, and opera's a bit behind in it, as we can imagine. So I will gladly put those websites in the chat.
Thank you. Just to raise our awareness and what's out there, like to know what's happening. I've got a great comment here, and somebody has put in the chat that through Afterward, Professor George Lewis has created a space. He's done something. We've talked about Black spaces and the need for them to sort of exist. But what the generosity, I think, or if I'm reading this comment correctly, the generosity in having sort of a Black space, but made more public and open in his opera. George, I know that you're in the chat because as I'm trying to follow things, people have been saying anything. Do you want to unmute and talk about this? And welcome to this session. It's great to have you here. And also, I got this, a small act of curation. Oh, thank you so much.
I should probably blur myself or make a better background. Let's try this one. Let's see, is this going to work or not? I can't really tell. Anyway, what did you want me to talk about, Naomi? I'll talk about it. I'll talk about anything. What would you
Oh,
think?
you are wonderful. Thank you. You've put something in the chat that looks terrific, a small act of curation. And so I've got that link. But also somebody has said they were really grateful for the sort of Black space that we've been talking about. Oh my gosh, look at you and your backgrounds. You're amazing. But this idea of Afterward is, I don't know if this was a conscious thing. I know you were telling the history of the Association for the Advancement of Creative Musicians, but you ended up showing us a space that people don't usually see, not just a creative process, but also a really important racial space. Is this something that you were thinking, uh-oh, I better not do this? I mean, especially when you've got one of your characters wearing the blonde wig and then that comes off and it's such a big moment.
Well, you know, what interested me about the working on the AACM project, because I wrote the book and I had to talk to all these people. I had to talk to basically 100 people. And those were all pretty much intimate Black spaces. I mean, I talked to people for a long time. They confessed things that even white people who I talked to we're creating Black spaces. I mean, I don't think it's required. I mean, people can create a Black space if they decide to do so. So people were very emotional about it. And one of the things I noticed that it was really, it wasn't really about what white people thought or what anyone thought outside of the Black people who were trying to find themselves and trying to redefine their lives. And so I just remember talking to people and saying, well, I thought your opera would be more about, struggles with the white man. And I told them, these people are basically struggling with each other. They were trying to, and then once they struggled with each other, and that was an old thing from the Stokely Carmichael days. Once you struggle with each other, that's going to be something that is going to be just as important. And maybe other communities should do the same. I think I heard Dr. Acon say something related to that. And that's certainly one thing that has to be done. I don't know, it's the whole opera is seen as an extended meditation on self-determination, on a kind of a coming of age opera. I said a Bildungsoper, coming of age opera. And to see all these people come of age and suddenly realize that they've been around now for 55 years. Everybody who started the organization has now passed away. And so they've passed on their ideas to the next generation. But the whole idea of it was really about having mobility for Black people, for Black artists, to be able to do whatever you want, because, Black artists are really the most policed artists in the history of the world. Really, everyone's trying to tell you what to do, and like, I would get letters from people all over the world telling me what they thought Blackness was and what I should be doing. And the most recent one was just a month ago in the Frankfurter Allgemeine Zeitung, where the guy was basically saying, well, they're seeking the Black sound, but the thing is, all these Black Afro-Diasporic composers, they sound just like us. I said, well, wait a minute, you mean to say that, wait a minute, what you're saying is we sound like ourselves.
Yes.
So it's not us and them like you're planning out, And so this guy, he thought not only was he able to, define what white people should sound like, he wanted to define what everybody was sounding like, what Black people would sound like too. And so you have to deauthorize those people. You can do it through scholarship, you can do it through any number of ways, but they have to be taken out of their game and sort of sit and basically de-universalized and deauthorized. And once that happens, then you can make some progress, I think. Anyway, but the other thing, those little things I sent you guys was really about, I think, the biggest challenge facing classical music, which is to stop thinking of itself as the celebration of a pan-European diaspora. And really, the way to really do that, I think there's a lot of things that can be done structurally, bringing more people in, bringing different kinds of people in, having more voices at the table. But it's already been said here in the conference that just because you're at the table, you're still treated as the other. And so the thing is that that is the situation that's going to be the hardest to overcome. And that's why I've been talking so much about reaching back to the Caribbean critical theorists and novelists, like Raphael Confiant or Patrick Chamoiseau, Glissant, these kinds of people, to re-examine the motif of creolization to the stage where, you really, and this may go against some of the stuff we may seem to go against, some of the things we've been talking about the creating the Black spaces, and it's true at a certain point. That's what the AACM, as far as I know, is still an all-Black space 55 years later. And that was at a time when nobody wanted to have an all-Black space, where you were threatened for having it. And people were really afraid of what that would do and who that would offend and all this kind of stuff. And so people ended up doing it anyway, and the sky didn't fall, and they ended up getting a lot of good things. Maybe I should stop talking now because it's getting late, right? It's getting late here.
Oh, I bet it is. And thank you so much for jumping in again. I see you as one of the real, if I can say this, godfathers, has such an odd connotation, but of just putting this conference together. And
well, I'm just older than most people here.
So
I mean, I don't think I'm as old as Jalalu, though. Is he still here? It's kind of late for him too.
Yeah, it is. I was so glad when he spoke. Yes, I don't know. I've got sort of my screens are in different ways. So I've got this complicated situation now where we only have a couple of minutes, and I want to, and thank you so much, George, because you've led us to a thought that one of the futures of opera, as I'm, saying, what are the futures of opera, is to look to the past, to sort of what you did with the AACM, looking to the past to sort of bring it here to the future, how the past will help us see what we've gone through, how we came to who we were, and are we still that, and where are we going, and what is it like to interact with those people. I can't help resist to say that when Mercadante died in the 19th century, Verdi was asked to take his position as the head of the Naples Conservatory, a very prestigious, well-paid position. And Verdi said, no, I don't want to do that. I'm happy, at Sant'Agata. And but here's my bit of advice: return to the past, and that'll be the future. And so, George, it feels like you're saying this, sort of, not that we have to go back to the past and relive it, but think about it and see sort of how do we deal with it now. I think that's one of the biggest issues in the United States, is dealing with the past and being able to move forward. In these last couple of moments, I want to give our panelists, and George, if he wants to, any final quick comments to say about the futures and where we're going, or where you hope we go.
I just want to briefly say, in prelude to the screening of Cry of the Third Eye, that the lead characters that you'll see are, one is my nephew in Act 1 when he was young. One was my student, and I was teaching at a homeschooling co-op that was put together by parents who wanted their children to be homeschooled. And these two characters, I followed them for 10 years, and they came back to the project. They lived their lives, but they came back to the project because of our relationship. And I think that that's so important. They were not actors, but again, they were people that authentically felt like I could hear them and I could see them. So it was easy for them to show up and perform their life and share that. So I think that that's really important about looking to the future. And also, as we're talking about Black space and different spaces for art, all art to take place, to really think about the policing of space and historical landmarks, gentrification of historical places, and supporting the perseverance and the upkeeping of these places. And I hope that you all can follow that in the film.
Oh, I'm looking forward to it. Thank you so much, Lee.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you all.
Melanie, Derrell, Melanie, jump in.
Yes, I think in addition to everything we've been talking about today in this whole forum, futures of opera is our futures of active inclusivity and authentic inclusivity. And I will emphasize Derrell's call to action of the urgency of needing to have leadership to help make this change possible. And thank you all for participating. Thank you to the panelists. Thank you, International Contemporary Ensemble, for making this happen.
I love this with the leadership. Melanie, let's be part of leadership, all of us. Let's be part of this leadership. Derrell.
Yeah, thank you, Melanie. Thank you, everyone, for these thoughtful conversations. Is so refreshing. The last word I want to leave in the space is actually not these are not my own thoughts. These are from Martin Luther King and their response to some of the feedback we've gotten as we do our work as the Black Opera Alliance, which is explicitly, an activist organization trying to effect real change. And there are folks, general directors, other folks who are saying, well, the way you're holding the field as accountable is not right. You can do it much better this way, much better this way. And as we talk about these like more literal Black spaces and the benefit of them and the productivity of them, I want to leave us also with this addition of the figurative Black space. And you have not done a good job of securing our freedom. So don't tell us how to do it. And so I'm just going to leave you with this quotation from Martin Luther King, April 1963, letter from Birmingham jail, in which he says, "First, I must confess that over the last few years, I've been gravely disappointed with the white moderate. I have almost reached a regrettable conclusion that the Negro's great stumbling block in the stride toward freedom is not the white citizen's counselor or the Ku Klux Klaner, but the white moderate who is more devoted to order than to justice, who prefers a negative peace, which is the absence of tension, to a positive peace, which is the presence of justice, who constantly says, I agree with you in the goal you seek, but I can't agree with your methods of direct action, who paternalistically feels he can set the timetable for another man's freedom, who lives by the myth of time, and who constantly advises the Negro to wait until a more convenient season. There is not a more convenient season. The time is now. Please join us in demanding Black space and opera."
Yes. Thank you. I love the letter from Birmingham jail. Thank you. Thank you. George, thank you for putting in the Sankofa. That's wonderful. Did you want to say anything?
Well, when Dr. Acon was speaking, I put an essay in the chat that it reminded me of. This is Baraka's article called Tokenism, 300 Years for 5 cents. So I will.
All right, everybody,
that's a good thing
download this
to look at.
Thank you so much. It is really a joy and a pleasure to be part of this. I'm not going to say goodbye because there are two things left. One, I want to remind you that we have Lee's wonderful opera, new opera film, Pride the Third Eye. And it's just been a pleasure being with you guys and to help put all this together. I also get to turn this over to Ross and Bridget, who have been guiding us from the background, moving us forward. Thank you all so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Naomi. I won't say much more, just to thank everybody here. Thank you, Lee. Thank you, Melanie. Thank you, Naomi. Thank you, Derrell. Thank you, George, for jumping in at 12:34 a.m. And I see Jennifer Kessler. Thanks, Jennifer. And Bridget, if you want to come on, if you are feeling good about that, that's good too. Thank you so much for having this amazing conversation today and all the conversations prior. And we look forward to tonight's screening, and we'll give everybody enough time to grab a bite or take a break. And Lee, thank you so much for allowing us to screen this tonight. I'm looking forward to watching it together. We'll see you all soon, and thank you so much. Have a great night.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right on.